Hi everybody, I'm really excited to be sharing this recipe with you today. Today I'm sharing a gluten-free sourdough bread recipe made with 70%, in this version of the recipe I'm using 70% freshly milled whole grain flours. I have been playing around with gluten-free sourdough for quite a number of years. Every now and then I dip my toe in that water just to experiment, and I've always had great success. Gluten-free sourdough is not difficult to do. Making gluten-free sourdough, as with other regular type of sourdough, it is a bit more challenging to get, a big fluffy bread. You're not going to get a big fluffy bread when you're using lots of whole grains in your flour mixture, but there's so much nutrition and flavour in freshly milled grains that for me it is totally worth it. You don't have to have freshly milled flours, of course, not everybody's going to be into milling their own. And I want to say right from the outset that this recipe, technically, baked in my kitchen, it's not gluten-free because I am milling my grains. My grains are all gluten-free grains, but I'm milling them in my mock mill, which I also use to mill wheat and spelt and other grains. So mine is contaminated. I'm not going to be giving it to anybody who absolutely has to have a strict gluten-free diet, so always bear that in mind if you're baking for other people. But if you're like me and lots of people who just really like to experiment and bake with all kinds of different grains and have a real variety of grains in your whole grain sourdough repertoire, then try out some gluten-free bakes. They're great. And for people who do need to have a strictly gluten-free diet, if you're into milling your own grains and you really want to go down that road, you can buy a mill and only ever mill gluten-free grains in it, and then your breads will be truly gluten-free. So it can be done. Anyway, this video is not about milling, it's about a really nice, easy, mostly whole grain, gluten-free sourdough recipe. So that's what I'm focusing on. There are a few elements to gluten-free sourdough recipes. Most recipes I've seen have these elements covered. For the flour portion, they will have some component of whole flours. Most will also contain some combination of starches. I'm adding some starches, some tapioca and some potato starch in this recipe too. My main flours I'm going to be using for this recipe are millet, buckwheat and brown rice, which I'll be milling. So between the whole grain flours and the starches, that's my flour portion for the recipe. Gluten-free sourdough often uses some kind of binding agents. The starches do help to bind the loaf, but I'm also going to be using some psyllium husk and some ground linseeds or ground flax seeds in the recipe, and that's going to really help to give this dough a really nice bready kind of structure and lift. You will also need a gluten-free sourdough starter. This is my brown rice starter that I made, well, it's probably about a month old now. It is really performing really well now. They take about a month to really kind of get going and really settle in. I just shared a video recently on how to make a brown rice, actually how to make any kind of sourdough starter. I demonstrated brown rice and whole wheat in the one video. So if you want to get into this and make your own starter, definitely check out that video. The recipe also uses water, obviously. You could use other liquids if you wanted to. I'm just going to use water. And most gluten-free sourdough recipes, because they contain other binding ingredients like seed gels and psyllium husk and things like that, they tend to have quite a high hydration. This recipe, in terms of baker's percentages, the hydration is 110%. So it's going to be a lot of water, but it's not going to look like it. It's going to be a really nice, good sort of dough. This recipe fits perfectly in a small to medium sized bread tin. This is a 1 litre, which is about a quart. I never know which is bigger, a quart or a litre, but this is just a 1 litre Jamie Oliver bread tin. Any kind of small to medium bread tin will fit. When you put the dough in this, it will almost fill it up. It'll look quite full, but then it'll rise up quite nicely and you get a beautiful domed top. Because this is my first ever gluten-free sourdough recipe I'm sharing on the channel, I will be talking a little bit through it to give the detail of the process because it's a bit different than other types of whole grain sourdough baking. But I'll try not to talk too much. The first thing you want to do is to make your water gel mixture. So that requires your psyllium husk and your ground linseeds, 20 grams of psyllium husk. It looks like a lot, but remember it's going into a whole loaf of bread. You can use less if you want and use more of the flax. You want about 30 grams of these two combined. You can also use ground chia seeds in this. All right, so 30 grams in total. To that, you want to add your water, and this recipe calls for 550 grams of water. Whoops, I went a bit over there. So I've got 559 grams there. I'm not going to worry about that. I want to show you that it doesn't matter that much. So just mix the psyllium and the flax into the water. And you do this first because you want them to gel up. You want them to fully absorb water, especially into the psyllium husk, so it becomes like a nice thick kind of gel. Next, I'm going to weigh out my whole grains for milling, but obviously if you're using store-bought whole grain flours, just weigh them out. I'm using 100 grams of brown rice to make brown rice flour. I'm using 150 grams of millet. Don't forget to zero your scale in between. $150. I just mill all of my grains together in my mock mill. These are all fine to mill together, just on the finest setting. And then buckwheat, 100 grams of buckwheat. These are all Australian grown grains. There we go. So there's my whole grains. I'm just going to mill them all together now. So there's my whole grain flours all milled. It's got a lovely kind of almost golden colour from the millet. So to the freshly milled flours, I'll add in my starches. I'm adding 75 grams each of potato starch. And tapioca starch. If you don't want to use as much starches as I've used, you can lower the amount. I think a really nice balance is 400 grams of whole grain flour and 100 grams of starch. Use whatever combination you're comfortable with. They all work, but a little bit of starch definitely does help with the texture and the lift and the softness of this dough. While we're on dry ingredients, don't forget your salt. You want 9 grams of salt as well. At this point, you can add seeds or nuts or, go crazy. Add whatever you want to your bread. I'm just going to make a plain one for this demonstration. Now you want to mix the salt, the starches, and the whole grain flours really well together. I'm just using my dough whisk that my dad made me. Such a beautiful tool. Just mix them all up really well. You just want the salt combined. The gel mixture, you're going to see it in a minute, it's quite thick. So this makes a relatively firm dough, believe it or not, with all that water. So having all of your dry ingredients really thoroughly mixed at the beginning is good. The whisk is really good for getting out the lumps in the starches. Some people sift their starches, but I don't bother with sifting. I just throw it all in, it works fine. So I've got my whole flours, my starches, my salt, I've got my water and my binders. All I need to do now is add in the sourdough starter in with the water mixture, and we've got our dough. Mix it up and then we're done. It is that easy. Here is the water psyllium flax mixture. Can you see that now, how kind of thick and gloppy that is? That's perfect, that's just what you want. All we have to do now is mix the sourdough starter in with that, just to make sure it's really well combined throughout the dough, and we're good to go. This is my starter, my brown rice starter. It is so active, it smells amazing. I mixed this up last night because the old one had been in the fridge for a few days, which, by the way, if you know my videos, you know I don't fuss with my starters too much. I have made great gluten-free sourdough with old brown rice starter from the fridge, like that's been in there for a week, and it works. For my test bakes, I was using 150 grams of starter, but it's actually quite a cold day here today. We're not quite in spring yet. We've still got a bit of wintry weather, even for Brisbane, which is pretty warm. So to speed this along a bit, I'm going to add 200 grams of starter. And adding a little bit more than usual, it just speeds up the fermentation process a bit. Just add your starter. As I said, anywhere between 100 and 200 grams will be great. It doesn't matter that much. It's going to be nearly all this jar. If you want to learn a bit more about how my easy, low fuss kind of maintenance method for my sourdough starters, I've got a video for that. I'll put a link for that in the description box. You don't need to fuss over them and feed them constantly. I thought I had more in there. That's about 190 grams. That's all I'm going to use. I'll leave that and feed that up for the next bake. All right, we'll mix that in. Smells so good, that brown rice starter, just like a sourdough starter should. I like to mix my wet ingredients and my dry ingredients really thoroughly. The more things you can pre-mix, the less attention you need to pay to mixing your dough. You don't have to worry that things won't get through it properly because you've already done that pre-mixing when it was at the easy stage. Now we're just going to dump all of that into the dough. Oh, I love that. Sorry, I'm left-handed. You can't, it's not the best side to have the camera on. That will do. Now, all we do is mix the two mixtures together. You can get your hands in there and mix with your hands if you want to, but I'm one of those bakers who doesn't actually like getting their hands all gloppy and covered in flour. I'm a bit funny like that. Maybe that's why I've developed all these easy ways to do things so I don't have to get my hands all floury. I like touching dough when it's already mixed, but I hate the floury, sticky bit in between. These dough scrapers are also fantastic for mixing doughs like this. You can see this is fairly firm. I'm still playing around with this recipe. I would not say this is the be all and end all gluten-free sourdough recipe, not by any stretch. It's just one that I've been playing around with, and I've been sharing it on my social media pages, and people said, hurry up and share that already. Just share it. We like it the way it is. So here it is. I'm sure there'll be more to come. I'm going to keep playing around with it. I've made some beautiful all millet, whole grain millet sourdoughs. That's a lovely bread, beautiful golden colour. So yeah, there will be more to come. This is just the beginning. So you can see that has got a really nice, soft, sticky, doughy texture. It will be quite sticky if you want to try and knead it, it will be hard to knead unless you don't mind sticky doughs. I think just kneading with a spatula is good. If you have a mixer, that is brilliant. But just for this first video, I wanted to do it by hand, but it is easier if you've got a dough mixer of some sort. All right, that's enough. All you need to do then is to grease your bread pan and put the dough in the pan. We're going to let it rise and we're going to bake it. I just use a bit of water on my bench just so that I can shape this a little bit. Some people let their gluten-free sourdough proof in the bowl for a few hours and then they shape it and let it do a final proof again. But I've tried both methods. I haven't found it any real advantage in doing two proofs with the shaping in between. I found it works really quite fine just by shaping it initially just once and then putting it in the tin, let it rise. Obviously it takes quite a while, and then bake your bread. You can see this is quite a good texture. It's a little bit sloppy, but it's holding together. I think it's going to be a pretty fine dough. I'm kind of even rolling it up like I would my normal wheat or my spelt-based doughs. So the more you play with it, the stickier it's going to get on your hands. Just wet my hands one more time. If you want to try and make it smooth, you can play around with it, but it never gets really super smooth. I'm just going to pop it in my tin. And if you want the top to be a bit nicer, just give it a bit of a smooth out with your spatula or the back of the spoon or whatever. I'm going to put this in my little proofing box. This is just a vegetable crisper fridge container thing. I just put that in there. You just want to cover it with a container or something so that it doesn't dry out, because we want to just leave this to rise now. As you can see, the dough is already fairly high up in the tin. What we're looking for is about a 1/2 to 1 inch rise. You don't want to let this double in size because it will be way too far gone. These breads ferment really readily, and I've added nearly 200 grams of sourdough starter to this, so it's going to ferment quite well. I'm going to try and find a warm spot for this. I imagine it's probably going to take about 5 hours today. For me, sourdough, and this goes for all sourdough, for me in summertime it takes about 4 hours, on a really hot day maybe 3. In wintertime, it can take anywhere up to 8 to 10 hours or even longer, depending on whether or not you find a warm spot for it and the temperature of your dough and all of those things. You really have to watch the dough and not the clock, and bake your bread when it is ready, not when the recipe tells you it's going to be ready, because yours will be doing something very different, no doubt. So I'm just going to keep an eye on that through the day, and then later on the afternoon, when it's looking like it's risen up a bit, I'm going to bake it. Hey folks, back again. It is now 3:30 in the afternoon, so it's been sort of over 6 hours, but it has been quite a cool day today. We've got some nice sunshine this afternoon, but it's only 20 degrees Celsius in the kitchen, so it's still reasonably cool. The dough has risen. You can tell it's not super bubbly, but it's, you know, it's risen, just about ready to bake. So I've got the oven preheating to 220 Celsius or thereabouts, and I've got a baking pot, like a roaster in there, that I'm going to bake this inside, and that just helps to trap some steam in around the loaf, which helps for the rise as well. The oven is preheated, and I just want to say that judging the proof on these gluten-free sourdough breads, especially whole grains, and generally with whole grain sourdough, always err on the side of caution. Always go for a bit of an underproof rather than a big billowy looking bread. When you're baking with yeast, you can get away with, much big, higher, puffier proofs, but with sourdough, they don't hold up to it. You need to bake them a bit sooner, otherwise you run the risk of a bit of an internal collapse when you bake. So we want to avoid that. Sometimes I jiggle my loaves a little bit and sort of feel them, see if they feel airy. I'm just going by the look of this. The sides are up to the side of the tin. I know it's risen at least 1/2 inch. I'm pretty sure that's going to be pretty close to right for this loaf. All right, this is my roaster. This is cast aluminium, this roaster. It's very light and easy to handle. It's brilliant. I put all my loaves, tin loaves in here. Any kind of pot or even another tin over the top, if it's got side bits you can clip together, that works really well as well. And I also am just going to give this a little spray of water to add a little bit more steam, because if you've got a good amount of steam around your loaf, it's going to prevent the crust from setting and you'll get the best rise possible. So I'll bake this now for 40 minutes covered for the whole time. All right, I actually forgot to set the timer, but I think it's been about 40 minutes. Whoa, wow. I think that's the best rise I've got so far. Fantastic. That looks really great. Sorry, the sunlight is a bit weird. It's getting in the way. That's beautiful. All right, it's not cooked enough. I'm going to put it back in. You want these loaves to be well cooked. You're looking for quite a dark golden brown crust. So I'm going to put that back in, probably another 10 minutes. Ooh, bit of steam there. That's more like it. All right. There we go. I am very happy with that. That's got a nice bursty rise, which kind of a little bit bursty on the sides, which tells me that I got my proof probably just about right. Let's tip it out. It's nice and golden. My oven's got this super cook setting where it uses the fan plus the top and the bottom element. So it does get pretty hot, even though I set it to 210, 220. But that's what you're looking for. Just your oven might be different. So bake it till it's making that hollow sound when you tap it. And there you have it. I will let that cool off now and I will cut it probably tomorrow morning now. And we'll see what it's like. Okay, the moment of truth. Ooh, that looks all right. Yeah, that's great. I had a little feeling. Okay, I want to show you something. See this little bit here, how there's a bit of a gap? That is the beginning of a flying crust. If I had have let this loaf proof any further than I did, it may have sunk a bit inside. When you're getting a bit of a gap up the top and more dense down the bottom, that's the beginning of a flying crust. So it just goes to show how careful you need to be with the proofing. The other thing that dawned on me last night about this bread was that normally I handle them quite gently, but when I was showing you in the video, I'm tapping it and I'm turning it around. Try not to do that, because if you've got a chance of any of the inner crumb collapsing, moving the bread too much after it's just come out of the oven before it's set inside, that is going to increase the chance of it collapsing. So try not to throw your bread around like I did. But that is good. I'm really, really happy with that. Well, thanks for watching, everyone. I hope you found that interesting and enjoyable and helpful. I think it's a pretty good place to start for a gluten-free sourdough recipe. I wish you well with your gluten-free sourdough baking, and I hope this is the first of many videos. I'd like to try different ones now that I've got this first one kind of done. If you'd like to support me making my videos for this channel, please head to buymeacoffee.com/ellieseveryday, and if you'd like to make a donation, you are more than welcome to do that there. I really appreciate it. I run Ellie's Everyday pretty much full-time. It's my full-time job now. It doesn't quite earn a full-time income, but I'm working on it, so any support that you can give is greatly appreciated. Thanks everyone, happy baking, and I'll see you in the next video.